Welcome to A24 on the Rocks. I will be your host this week, Cole William Whitlaw Gibson. Tonight I am drinking the lovely Star Ward, an Australian whiskey, just to celebrate one of my favorite films of all time, The Rover. Up next we have...
Yo, what up? It's Blaze Fitzgerald Ryan the First. Today I'm drinking again for the ballers on the budget. We're doing the champagne of beer, Miller High Life. Next up, we got the...
This is Eric. I am drinking aquavit again and enjoying every last drop of it. Up next, we have...
This is Kelly, and I am also drinking aquavit, this time neatly on the rocks, which I highly recommend over having it in a cocktail. And lastly...
Hello everyone, I'm Kevin, and tonight I'm drinking the Busker Irish Whiskey, which is a triple cask, triple smooth whiskey, and it's meh, it's okay. I'm ready to talk about some movies.
A24 on the rocks. All right. Well, as I alluded to this week, we started off with one of my favorite movies, and was also the first A24 film that I remember ever watching, The Rover, which stars Robert Pattinson and Guy Pearce. It was directed by David Michod. And the synopsis of it is basically it's 10 years after a global economic collapse, and a hardened loner pursues the men that stole his only possession, his car. Along the way, he captures one of the thieves' brothers, and the duo form an uneasy bond during the dangerous journey.
Fuck yeah!
So, going into this film, I guess my first question is, have any of you guys seen this movie, or is this all your first time? Because I don't know if anyone...
First time for me.
First time.
Ooh.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, so it was definitely an under-the-radar film. It did horribly in the box office. I think it made only $3 million out of the $12 million budget. But it's got really good reviews, and I think it's pretty awesome. With the opening scene... is probably one of my favorite opening scenes in a lot of movies. Kelly, I am interested to hear what your thoughts were on the beginning of this movie.
So I was going to ask everybody if it was another check your volume, start again. And I was like, this is becoming a regular thing, but I quite like it. But I immediately was zoomed into the world. I found it it deafened everything else behind me, even if I heard nothing. And then a fly kind of crawled up his nose, and Eric goes, "Did he just notice a fly went up his nose?" And I was like, okay, I'm back in the real world. And then I was pulled back in again. But I really liked the opening sequence a lot.
Eric, what about you?
Yeah, I definitely started out just this guy is giving me a lot of anxiety. He is not noticing that flies are going up his nose, and then it just keeps on going from there. Where when he talks to people, he doesn't hear what they're saying, and he just repeats himself over and over again a lot. And then also vice versa, when somebody asks him a question, he doesn't really ever give them straight answers. It's just I don't know. He's gotten past the point. He's so depressed and broken down. He's gotten past the point of just normal social interactions. He can't do them anymore. Well, yeah, it sent me in this Australian desert. That's the vibe I was getting. The 2008 recession was about 6 years before this, I guess. But this seems kind of like a world if the economy just completely collapsed, the currencies just completely deflated, weren't worth anything, and we're just living in this lawless outback.
Yeah, and what you talked about kind of alludes to one of my favorite movie mottos, or the screen grab for what they did was they said that fear the man with nothing left to lose, which I feel like the Guy Pearce just nailed that whole mantra and his whole demeanor throughout the whole movie. But Blaze, what about you? What do you like about the beginning, or what do you think?
Yeah, what I liked about the beginning was the ambiguity of it all. Most movies these days are kind of grandiose, where, the fate of the world lies on everything that the main characters do. And this was a bit of fresh air in the terms of that a guy was just trying to get his car back. So it was a very simple, safe plot, and I wouldn't say safe. The plot was definitely more grounded to earth than, the average MCU, or even a Mad Max, which is a movie that I could totally compare this to. The fate of the world was not riding on this. The fate of the man's car was riding on this. So it really helped get into that these are real characters. You don't meet Robert Pattinson's character as a full character until a little bit on. The fact that, God, I really wanted to tiptoe around this. My sister taught me a lot last week, apparently. But he was special needs in some sort of way. He was very good at being a thief.
Disabled. You can say disabled.
Yeah, disabled. Yeah, he was socially awkward. So the way that they played off each other, almost like a buddy road trip movie, was very interesting. Even though it was a lot darker than Zach Galifianakis and Will Ferrell would play it. So intro vibes were very, very good in that retrospect.
What about you, Kevin? What were your thoughts?
My first couple thoughts is there was specific moments in those opening scenes that made me take note and pay attention. The first one is where you have that scene where the car flips over and is coming across the windows of the bar, and you just have our protagonist Eric's face just kind of blankly staring. And there's no music, or there's no ambient noise, it's just the soundtrack at that point, which I thought was also really excellent, that it completely puts you in the visual mindset without having you distracted by any of the other noises that were happening. From there, the movie does a very good job of pinpointing that first moment where they smash the driver's side window, and that's the vehicle mover, right? That's how the audience knows that we are off and running, is once that car window gets smashed, and we now feel that the intensity of the moment is now escalating. I really enjoyed that I was put into the world, like Kelly said, immediately. And it certainly made me view that character in a different light, because he was, single-minded in his approach in the beginning. And sure, we'll get to it as we continue on, but those first initial impressions were excellent, and I was invested in the movie right off the bat, which I think was the directorial intent. So, good on him.
Yeah, you touched on, one of my favorite scenes. Just the first time I watched this movie, everything's just dead quiet. There's very little going on. And then, they have the kind of the flash between the car. And then that scene where he's just sitting there and he's having a drink, and you just see that truck just fucking take a header right across the window. And it's all just silence. It's all muffled, basically. And he just is sitting there like no one's reacting, no one's doing anything. And it just happened. And then that kickstarts the whole movie, and it just goes, from there. And I thoroughly enjoyed that aspect of that film. It does have a lot of Mad Max vibes, and it also has a lot of vibes for a lot of movies, but it definitely falls into that Mad Max category, like you were talking about, Blaze. Next, I want to talk about, or I want to kind of go into Kevin. You actually mentioned him by name, but I found it very cool and interesting how the whole entire film, they never mention the protagonist's name, not once. Like, he's never referred to, they never call him by his name, he never even says his name. But I was going to ask you guys if any of you picked up on that, or if you knew what his actual name was without looking it up.
No, when I started doing the research for this, I saw what they were calling him in all of the synopsises and the IMDb stuff, and I was like, oh, okay, well, that's a name. But immediately, I don't know if I would have called him Eric. It doesn't matter what his name is, and that's the cool part about it. It does not make a difference what his name is throughout the entire movie. So I thought that was a cool factor.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. They made a big point with that scene of him refusing to say his name for the longest time, that it then planted in the back of my head, like, I'm going to keep my ears perked up just to hear if I can catch it at any point, or if it's never mentioned, that'll be interesting. And then when credits roll in order of appearance, it says Eric. Obviously, we have an Eric on the podcast, the love of my life. And I was like, Eric, look, it's your name. Like, I thought it was very interesting that they don't name him, because does it matter in that kind of world? And it's something that he clearly holds very guarded, like many things that he does. And I think that it was an interesting choice.
With that scene, or going into that whole grandma scene, and when he goes into that room and all that stuff, that it really threw me off. The first time when he asked her what, if she saw the thing, and she just immediately goes and asks if she wants to sleep with a boy. That was quite jarring to me, but is also like obviously built the world and kind of elaborated on what they're dealing with out in that lifestyle. Blaze, what did you think about the very first time that we saw Robert Pattinson?
The first time that we saw him, you kind of got a backstory on him to begin with. I believe, from what I read about it, him and his brother and the rest of the gang were like robbers, and it was a robbery that went wrong. Motherfucker. Hold on. We meet Robert Pattinson's character. Jesus Christ. We meet him half dead on the side of a road on a bank robbery gone wrong. It appears that his brother and his gang left him to die, even though that he wasn't. When we actually are formally introduced to him, outside of just dragging along the streets, we meet him half dead in front of his brother's truck, which Guy Pearce, Eric, picked up. His introduction was, kind of who he played the entire movie, was someone who comes off as a simpleton, but probably knows a lot more than he lets on.
All right, everybody, we just had a little technical breakdown. Apologize if anything gets out of whack. We are back in the business. We just talked about Robert Pattinson and how great and beautiful of a man he is and how we are all stans. And then we kind of dove into the nurse aspect, who was introduced as the doctor. Eric is trying to save Robert Pattinson so that way he can get the information from him and use him to find his car and basically get revenge on the people that wronged him and stole his, the last thing that he had precious to him. And the nurse, she brings a lot of depth to this movie and brings a lot of more information and like breadcrumbs along the way, which I will hand that over to Kelly to kind of describe what she experienced during that.
Yeah, the nurse, and like you said, she really paints the world in a more broad light and a more, it's finally a break from like the brutalism a bit as far as we can. I also like how she's protected by the town and they won't reveal where she lives unless you ask the right people and buy goods and maybe at gunpoint in order to get there. But it's another point of great writing. We were talking about the advice that Eric gives Robert Pattinson, and as well as him talking about the world that he lives in and when he killed people and the worst parts of it. But everything that comes out of her mouth I found really engaging in a positive kind of way. And the scene where Eric sneaks away into the place where all these dogs are in cages, and you learn it's all these people that left their pets behind with maybe the thought that I'll come back and get it. Can you just watch this dog? And nobody ever comes back. And that just like sends a chill down my spine. And I was curious what you all kind of thought of that scene with all the animals.
Yeah, well, it's just like, it shows how far we've come in civilization where, nobody really has pets anymore because everybody's just eating their pets. And that's the reason why she had all these dogs in cages in there. She said that if, they were let to roam free, then people would start eating them because that's what already happened. And then obviously that was such a touching scene where Eric was staring at all of the dogs, and you could tell that it meant something to him. For the first kind of time, the whole movie, you could really see him getting, like, sad and emotional, and actually feeling something for someone besides himself. You could tell that definitely was going to come back into play later. Personally, I could. But at the same time, it was followed up by one of the most violent scenes of the movie where he guns down like 5 people. So it just was such a great juxtaposition of this kind of, like what Kelly was saying, like a more gentle, heartwarming scene, but also kind of sad, into an extremely violent scene. So.
Yeah. Now, with this scene, this is, considered one of the biggest clues in the storyline that of really what he's after. Was anyone able to like put together what he was doing or what was happening until the last scene of the movie, Kevin?
So I definitely didn't put it together, but I made note of the significance and the importance of that scene in general, and how you could definitely tell that he shows some true raw emotion for the first time in the film when he's looking at the dogs. I think we've done a good job of avoiding the obvious spoiler, and we'll save it until we get to the conclusion. But I do think that that's entire scene in general, from the moment that they drive onto the property until they leave, is very significant and relevant to the whole thing. It shows the only real glimpse of humanity that we see in the entire movie, as far as the emotion of losing the partner, of being able to save Robert Pattinson's life, just that true emotional person who wanted to do good for the sake of doing good, where everywhere else in the entire scene is all out for themselves or doing things for their own right. And I thought that was very refreshing, but it was also fleeting enough that it made you forget about it, and the rest of the scenes continued just to, like Kelly said, to be brutal and just to weighing on you. But having that oasis was definitely important, because it refreshed the viewer and allowed them to not feel completely burdened by the ridiculous, oversight of all the death and all of the destruction and things that were happening afterwards.
Yeah, I know when I first watched this movie, I knew it was important, but I had no idea. I wasn't able to put it together either. And I think they did a very good job of showing you something very important, but then quickly changing the pace and make it, high intense, high action, to make you almost forget about it when those guys roll up and he, gets into a gun battle. Blaze, did you have anything to input on that?
Yep, I didn't even think of it until Eric said something. So that's where I was. I didn't even think of it as an important scene. I just thought it was just more of him being John Wayne badass, don't touch my wounds, I got this, So, no, that's actually very clever. That is one of those moments where I'm going to have to go back and rewatch it, because that made no goddamn sense. The whole first half of the movie made no goddamn sense to me, so I'm gonna have to watch it anyways. But that's some really good foreshadowing for sure.
I do think there's something to be said there that one review I read too. It was just like all of the most important things that shape this world and get this movie going, like everything that gets these events set in motion, they aren't shown. What they did, so they robbed the army base, those group of guys, or tried to at least. They didn't show that whole scene. They didn't show why there was an economic collapse or any of the things following that. They didn't show Eric at probably the biggest pivotal points in his life, where he killed his wife and her lover, and they just immediately spit you into this world without explaining much at all. And I felt like that was such an interesting choice by the director, and I think I kind of like it, or by the writer, just because there's been so many post-apocalyptic films that have been done, and I like focusing more on this character-driven story for this film.
Yeah, and that's like why I love this movie so much, is because it's such a, again, it kind of goes back to like last week with the slice of life, but it's, instead of a slice of real life, we're going to dive into just like a very small part of like this apocalyptic story. There's no, like you guys alluded to, there's no massive, save the world or anything like that. It's a guy trying to get something that he has lost and going through the people and the towns and stuff. And it's very small, self-contained story that is very, very well done and very interesting. And I really, really enjoy that. Kelly?
Something that I felt while watching this movie was like I was playing a video game, post-apocalyptic Australian Red Dead Redemption, where you have like a main quest, get your car back, and then you have all these little side stories on your way there. But even down to like the first like engagement that he has, which is like kind of talk to grandma's not working, obtain gun, return to grandma,
Yeah.
obtain information, move on to next thing. It felt like a game. It felt like he was my main character. That's, I think, what helped me stay so engaged. And I like it, like you said, it's a slice of life in a fresh post-apocalyptic story, and I enjoyed that as well.
Yeah.
And the car was a 2011 Holden Commodore SSV Redline, which is actually a General Motors company that was only sold in Australia or manufactured in Australia, that was actually discontinued in 2013, and this movie came out in 2014. So, like, I kind of like how they dated this film by having that car in it. And also, it's kind of a piece of shit car, and so you're wondering the whole film, why does this guy care about that car so much? He has a truck that he just got, too, so...
Yeah.
Absolutely. I really liked the fact that when we talk about post-apocalyptic worlds in general, and in this circumstance it's post-crisis, but it's usually significantly into the future. We're only talking about 15 years, so that's really cool for us to be able to see how the U.S. dollar still has currency effect, right? We still have, availability of gasoline, which you don't see in a lot of other apocalyptic viewpoints. So it made it relevant for the viewer because we can see that happening in our lifetime, right? If all these economic things go wrong, all of a sudden we're looking at a possible crisis that we can relate to. And I thought that was cool.
With with this movie being a post-apocalyptic film, I really enjoyed some of the cinematography. I'm interested to kind of get Kelly's perspective because I think you're a big cinematography person like myself on how this film was shot and like the colors and usage and things of that nature.
Landscape was a huge part of it, and my personal taste is the exact opposite of Australia. They made Australia look kind of gorgeous with the way that they shot it, but also very real and gritty and sandy and hot as fuck. They definitely did their best to really set that, and I loved the amount of times that we would get really close-ups to people's faces. I loved the medium shots. I think that there was a great variety between it all, and the colors is the same thing as well. That dog scene with all the dogs in cages, I know I'm going back to it, but it's all lit up in kind of like a blue and purpley kind of hue, and it feels healing, and it's very different from all of the oranges that we've been fed up until orange and bloody red and all these kind of colors, and then you have this kind of cool, and it's a break from all the heat and from all of the constant danger. But yeah, cinematography top notch.
Blaze, as our resident sweat boy, how do you feel about how they prepped the actors and made them look and really made them feel like they were part of the environment?
I mean, yeah, they did a really good job. I wouldn't call it costumes, but the way the actors just kind of looked like they lived in their own filth for 10 years. It was, no one looked like fancy. No one looked like the, again, we talk about, post-apocalyptic worlds, and there's usually that, weird steampunk guy that has the curly mustache and the robotic spiders. I don't know. I just watched Wild Wild West recently, so I'm just thinking. But no, it was very even down to what Eric said about some discontinued car from 2013 was the central, no pun intended, driving plot. It's very strange to me because there's still an army, so I don't know how far along they are along in this apocalypse. But there's also total lawlessness, and where you can just shoot dwarves in the face with, barely any consequences. The Paramount scene was towards the end. Again, spoiler heavy. They break into Henry's house, who is Ray's brother, to get the car back. They're unguarded, but they're guarded at the same time. They sleep in twos, but they're also deeply sleeping, and they all just when they wake up, they just kind of look even worse than my morning face. So it seems like there are very few times where you actually get to sleep in this movie, and I really feel like they do a really good job of bringing it all together. The way that I think someone already said it, the way the flies just crawl on people's faces, the way that they just kind of live in disrepair, disorganized life. I mean, it's a pretty bleak way to show, especially in the Western Australian desert, which I'm sure is terrible with Wi-Fi and electricity. Although the motel did have lights, so again, I'm just so weirded out about when this actually takes place.
15 years, I think the power grid probably would stick around, right?
There's some, maybe they have some hydroelectric that's still functioning and hasn't collapsed, but no, I wholeheartedly agree.
It does seem so there's a military, and they actually tried to arrest Eric, and he was saying, I'm going to send you to Sydney, so apparently there is still some jail there, maybe. It just seems like the grasp on society, any kind of law and order, it's very, very thin, but there is still some, and it probably only applies when their own military members get killed, which is what Eric did. He killed a military guy, so that's why he got arrested. Anyone else you kill, you're probably not going to get in trouble for it at all. But yeah.
The way that I kind of took that is, I think they say it's 10 years after the collapse, and that's the start of the movie. And I assume that would be like now, as far as years go. But for like the military, the way that I took that, when he says we're going to send you to Sydney, and he says, and then you can fight your way out or break out or whatever they're doing over there, it gave me the impression that it was an economic collapse, and I think that that's confirmed. But it went under some kind of martial law, and all of these military bases became kind of satellites away from each other that started enacting their own kind of lay of the land. That's the way that I kind of took that, and this guy's still doing paperwork just like to make himself feel like there's some order in the world, and I think it's just for him.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because it almost feels like Nazi-esque, the way that he's like, I'm just doing my job, I don't give a fuck about you, I'm following orders, so maybe that's, I don't know, they leave that part of the world, like we said, it's a very centralized story, so it's kind of cool the way they leave the rest of the world to your imagination.
No. So, Eric and Kevin, being our resident music bros and musician types, what were your thoughts on the kind of the overall music and themes of this? And then also I want to ask you specifically about the Robert Pattinson karaoke scene. I don't know if whatever one you want to take it away, I'll let you guys go for it.
Kevin, you can go.
Sounds good. So I was initially impressed with the soundtrack right off the bat. I had taken some notes that it impressed me with the way that it aided the intensity of the film. I had alluded to it earlier when I was talking about it, but I really do think that minimalistic aspect of it, the atonal clanging, right, the dissonance kind of really applies well to this world. It doesn't distract you from what's happening. It only aids the suspense of what's happening with the characters. And because you have 99% of the movie with that type of vibe, when you do get Robert Pattinson's version of Pretty Girl Rock by Carrie Hilson, which is that song that we hear there, I know me personally, I was like, did something just take over my speakers? Is something playing that I'm not paying attention to? Because it was so jarring, completely out of what the film was doing up to that point. But I appreciate it now on my kind of second viewing and note taking, because I really think it broke that brutalism, broke that train of just bleakness, and added something just completely poppy and bright. And it reminded us that Robert Pattinson's character is still simple-minded in that sense and still has that innocence. And that allows the viewer to kind of attach to him a little bit more, especially up to those final scenes where we, do see his eventual demise. So I really enjoyed the soundtrack in general. It aided a lot to it, and I just really thought that it brought the movie together.
I enjoyed that scene a lot, and I think it really brought some, showed, who Robert Pattinson, his character was, and kind of his innocence and being trapped in this world that he was stuck in. Now, going off of
froze. Oh, sorry. Go.
I froze?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Don't forget. Yeah.
Going off of the what you said, Eric, that final scene, or towards the final scene, where you have like kind of the final lead up with Robert Pattinson and Guy, and they meet up with the brother Henry and the whole gang, and they're infiltrate the house, and they start lining them up. It all goes horribly wrong, and ended up basically everyone dies but Eric, but Guy. And my question to you guys is, do you think that Eric is a good person or a bad person, or where do you think he lines up in, if you have to, is he the bad guy, or is he just in what he's doing? And
Yes. I don't think there are any good guys in this film. I think the tone they set in this movie is of a moral gray, where everyone is just out there to live for themselves. And again, I cannot believe how little we're talking about Guy Pearce, how great he did in this role of just a guy who is just so over life. In the best of ways, of how he's one of those actors that does more with what he doesn't say than what he actually does say. he is not a good guy. He killed his wife in cold blood. He feels bad about it. But, I mean, the fact that he went to those extremes, really questions you as a person. And then the fact that he was just trying to, if we've already said it, I'm sorry, but he's just trying to bury his dog. That's the reason why he's chasing these people. And he stopped at zero lengths. The amount of people, like, he literally killed a dwarf that was trying to sell him guns, shot him cold in the face. And then when you look back on it, you're like, oh, he just wanted to get his dog's corpse so he could give him a proper burial. So we live in a world where morals there's not just right and wrong, it's, about survival. So he's kind of a bad guy, and just like everyone else in the world that we meet, the grandma lady who called him my baby, she seemed like almost like neutral, and then but the first thing she said was, would you like a boy to sleep with? So I think this is a very me first world that they live in now, and Guy Pearce's character is not contributing it, and he's definitely part of the perpetual cycle of lawlessness. I think someone said perfectly, it's like a western that takes place during the apocalypse. So
yeah. Do you think he would have shot the dwarf if the dwarf didn't throw rocks at the dogs?
Oh, good point.
I think he didn't have enough. He didn't have any money. So it's like,
shot him.
Yeah, the guy was just saying like, hey, no, I need money, and he's, like, okay, you are the only thing getting in between me and getting my dead dog back.
That's pretty good. That's a pretty good point.
Well, I think that you're exactly right, because they made that a point for a reason, and I think that perhaps up until he saw that, at any time he could be willing to walk away from this grand task that he's about to go on, to figure out, like, he could have just been like, all right, cut my losses, time to go.
Never would, though.
But he sees this stone get thrown at a dog, and he's like, you know what? I have a mission.
I don't think he was ever going to walk away, though. Like, he was dead set on burying his dog.
But I don't know if he would have just, like, straight up cold blood just murdered that dwarf. But Kevin?
Man, what I was thinking about that whole scene is, I think he's kind of this chaotic neutral guy who is moving on his own mission, and something triggering as a rock throwing or something like that. He talks about it in his scene where he says that no one came after him after he murdered or killed, I guess, in this circumstance, his wife and lover. After that moment, there was no good or bad. There was no crime. There wasn't anything, because there was no justice for that. So once that happens, his brain, like you said, is singularly set on his goal and his mission, and anything that's going to stop that it's not worth it to him anymore. And that's why we see the kind of disregard of humanity in that scene.
So he had a chance to just drive away his car. Everyone was asleep inside. He was sitting there and definitely considering it. Like, I could just drive away right now and not kill anyone. But I think Ray was so, like, I need to go in there and confront my brother for leaving me behind at the military complex. So, and he made it, like, kind of made a friend at that point where he was like, okay, I will follow you in, Ray. I will do this with you. Right. This is...
Because Ray could have gone in and been with his brother, and everything would have been fine. They would have separated their paths and everything. And that's so poignant when his brother's being like, what did you do to Ray at the end there? Because, like, he really did have an impact on him as a person in such a short amount of time together.
Blaze, you look like you got something to say.
Yeah, I completely disagree. I don't think that Eric and Ray were friends at all. I think
Eric bought him in the end, but
no. I think Eric belated him for pretty much a quarter of the movie, and there's a scene shortly after he saves Eric from the army, and he makes a point to say, "Oh, it was pretty easy. I just killed two of them behind their head," and then the guy like, "Why are you like almost like why are you stuck here? I'm the idiot," And then they go to the quote-unquote gas station immediately after. And again, Eric is haggling with the prices, Oh, I don't have that much money. I got Australian. They're like, no, American only. And then fucking God, I can't even think of his name right now. Robert Pattinson just throws out a big old wad of American cash and says, this is it. So I think he was more trying to prove to Guy Pearce, I think Robert Pattinson is trying to prove to Guy Pearce that he's not the idiot that he called him the entire time. Because if you look at their earlier conversations, did you know that, or does your brother tell you that? So Ray is not a good person either, but they're not friends. That's my big point. I am so sorry. This is going to sound really jumbled, but I really wanted to make that point, that they're not friends, and he's not good either.
So
I think.
Go ahead, Kelly.
Okay, I think that the shift happened where Ray did care for him, because he breaks him down by saying your brother doesn't care about you. He left you for dead. And he breaks down after that and shatters his reality. And he believes him. And then after he unfortunately kills that little girl, he gets the big brotherly advice of, you shouldn't forget about this. That's the cost of taking a life. And I think that then he attaches himself to Eric, like that's his big brother, and I'm going to stick with him now. And now his mission is my own. And we're entwined. And I don't think that Eric necessarily cares until he sits in his car and he's like, I could leave, but look at this guy staring at me, waiting for me to help.
Yep.
I'm in it now. Like I could end my mission right here, but we'll see it through. I do think that they care for each other. They're not friends. It's not a buddy Tommy boy movie yet, but they do care for each other in the end.
Yeah, so I don't know if Eric cares as much as we let on, because with his wife and even the lover, he went and buried them, and with his dog he buried them. But with Ray and all the other guys, he just burned the bodies. So if
Viking funeral,
them, though.
That's a Viking funeral.
Well,
no, he's just another dead body. You're right.
He just burns them with all the other guys, instead of, if he's taking the time to bury the dog and even his wife and stuff, why would he go, if he's already digging a hole, he could have dug a hole for Ray, but instead he chose to just burn them all in one massive pile.
Probably just doesn't care about him as much as his
Hold
dog.
on.
Yeah.
Hold on. Let's stop this here. I think that once the results of everybody dying, he knows that he has to appreciate it and approach it the same way. There was an absolute distinct moment when they're having the conversations, when Ray has that conversation in Chinese with that lady, getting them direction to where they're going, where you see a change in the way that Eric appreciates Ray. He all of a sudden goes, wait a minute, you're not a half-wit, you're not necessarily completely useless, you just spoke this random language that I don't understand to somebody and got us directions where we're going.
I think he appreciated him because he helped him get to his goal.
Right, but I also think that what Eric mentioned right before we got talking about this, how they're both sitting in the car, that's the defining moment that shows that Eric actually gives a shit about Ray as a person. Otherwise, he gets in that car and drives away with his dog in the back trunk, and nobody is wiser. But he wants to avenge his brother, he wants to avenge the situation, and he wants to help his now newfound friend.
Or he just wants to kill the guys.
At this point in this world, I don't think we can just say, like, people are just like friends, like it's survival number one at all times. Yeah, but I can say that Ray probably at that point somewhat cared about, or Eric somewhat cared about Ray, but maybe he wasn't his friend. But he decided to go inside and see it through with Ray. So
no, you're absolutely right, Cole. If he actually cared about him, he would have helped bury the dude, right? Instead of just being another body to put in the flames. That is 100% right.
He probably just didn't care about him as much as his dog.
Let's go to Kelly.
Lots of people throughout the film. He kills lots of people throughout the film, and he does not do anything. He doesn't burn them. He doesn't bury them. We were talking about sound design earlier. Think about the sound when he's sitting there and he's picking up the weight of these bodies and dragging them out to the flames, and then he picks up Ray, and the sound, boom, bass comes in. There is weight behind it. There's emotion behind it. It meant something.
Fair enough.
No.
Fair enough.
You know what? Oh, you're saying
They zoom in.
You're saying that he helped him right out of the goodness of his heart. He wanted to help him see it through the end.
Not
Out of the
goodness
goodness of his heart.
He just
Vengeance and convenience. And sure, why not? I could leave, but
Vengeance and convenience. No, he snuck up on 4 sleeping robbers. So maybe he went to the house knowing that he could split a cash load with the guy. And if they both walked out alive, or maybe he
was money. He did
Trusted
mention
him
there was
to
money
do
in
half
there.
the job too.
Yo,
At
guy,
that
here's
point,
the
the partners in crime.
about
Yeah.
Robert Pattinson. Get the fuck out of here.
I love when we all argue about things. It's fantastic.
You know what really bothered me about that whole scene? In most scenes that involve body burning, I feel like it would be very difficult to burn a fresh body because they are very wet. Just like
I
if you
agree.
ever start a campfire,
There was a lot of wood.
Yeah,
there was a lot
They're
of
in
wood.
We're gas on 'em,
Australia,
didn't we?
bodies are drier.
yeah.
Yeah, gas, petrol.
Yeah, I throw gas on wet logs and they still don't burn up like that. Jeez Louise.
You're gonna have the FBI calling you next week. So.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Paul's like, I keep trying to burn these bodies.
Why?
It's not working.
Why
I
don't the
understand it.
bodies burn?
Literally, like thousands of people choose to get burnt. Like
Cremation
to
is
burn their
different.
dead bodies.
That's different. I'm talking about just a pile of
At this
sticks,
point, there's
throw
probably no
some
cremation
gas.
services. So
His
There went the
intention
rail.
time put behind it. He could have just left
We're
him
off.
there.
yeah, he could have left all of them in the house.
Well, yeah, but
Yeah, well, I don't think he
it's
was
cool to burn bodies though.
No, yeah, I was gonna say no matter how much like he liked Ray, I don't think he liked him any like more or less than anyone else in the house.
I don't think he liked him any more than he loved his dog.
Yeah, his dog was
I
like
agree.
Yeah, so
priority numero uno.
So talking about
Yeah.
the dog. So obviously, the end of the movie, after he burns all the bodies, he opens up the trunk, and there is his dog that had passed away, and he's trying to give it a proper burial. And that's basically the whole story: is him trying to put his dog at rest, which is his last glimpse of humanity and kind of where he become a broken man. That scene. How did you guys feel about that, or what was your initial reaction when you see him, pulling a dog out to essentially bury it? I'll start with you, Kevin. Mr.
My initial reaction was kind of like, oh, I'd forgotten. I guess there was an alternative motive for all of this. I noticed earlier in the film that he took very early care not to run into the trunk, for example, and he was taking good care to not damage the car, but I also thought it was just about the car for some reason. Obviously, knowing that now, it seems to be a theme in these A24 movies, right? That the final thing is what is supposed to jumpstart the viewer's brain into rewatching the rest of the movie in their head and trying to figure out what it meant during the entire thing. And I think that's very similar in this situation, where you finally get that payoff, and then maybe it makes sense, maybe it infuriates you, maybe it makes you happy. It depends on how you are. For me, I thought it tied it together nicely. I thought it put a nice bow on the whole thing. But Eric mentioned it earlier in the podcast that it really made life feel cheap. It really made it feel like he went through all of that trouble, killed all of those people, just discarded all of that life because he valued a dog's life more than all of those other things. And maybe that brings the stark reality of the post-apocalyptic world into viewpoint for the viewer. And maybe that was the directorial intent, and it probably was. But I thought that in general, it just kind of put a button on it, and it went, okay, I can understand it, and we move on. So, yeah.
Eric?
It's weird to think about this film, in the end, it's a man's best friend kind of film. Like, there's no real,
It did come out
comments
before
on
John Wick, just to be clear.
yeah. There's no real, big comment on, this dystopian world and what led to it, like I was saying, and also, no big societal comment about all of it. You can just take away, anarchy's pretty bad when it happens, But, I do, it's a very, it's a Western, a lot of Western films, they just have a very simple plot like this. And I like how they saved the dog for the very end, and it came as a surprise. Then you finally put all the dots together, and you're like, oh, okay, this is why this guy cared so much about his shitty car, And I like that surprise element at the end. So,
Kelly?
Yeah, I can't say anything that hasn't already been said because it was so well said by the two of you. But I saw the dog at the end, and I was just like, I would do the same thing.
Fair enough. Blaze, you have anything to add before we wrap
Yeah,
this one up?
I loved it and I hated it at the same time. I hated it because it felt so anticlimactic at the time I was watching it. But then, kind of akin to what Eric said, it really made me love the movie more because it's so inconsequential, like within the realm of that universe, that we watched this man's trials and tribulations and escape death and give death and, you know, fight the Australian government just to get to his dog. And it's like, you know, you think about, you know, like almost like in the reverse, like Homeward Bound, right? Like these dogs that, you know, want to find their master so badly, and the cat. So it's almost like, it feels like it should be a feel-good movie, but the steps that it takes to get there almost makes you feel awful about it. So when it turns out to be a dog, I wouldn't say the word subversive, especially because all this foreshadowing you guys have been telling me about that I didn't even think about, like not T-boning the car, the dogs, and the, you know, gosh, that was it was so wonderful and so terrible at the same time that I have a lot of conflicting emotions about it right now.
Gotcha. Well, we're getting down to the time frame where we give our reviews, but before we all give our reviews, I wanted to read one person who did not seem to enjoy the movie Rover for one situation in particular, and I wanted to get your guys' take on it. It was listed as a goof, as basically a mess up by the filmmakers, and this person said that when Ray shoots through the motel door and you know, kills that young girl, you don't hear her body fall. However, when you open the door, clearly the body fell. So my question to you guys, was that done intentional, or was that a goof?
I mean, simply a little girl doesn't weigh a lot. A little girl collapsing probably isn't going to be.
I keep the surprise.
Yeah,
literally a car just like tumbled over like 3 times earlier. You didn't hear anything inside there. So
I know.
It was not intentional. It was just.
Yeah.
No, I found it hilarious that this person
It was 100% intentional.
Yeah,
I don't know what you're talking about.
Went in and was just like, I can't believe these people fucked it up. And it's like, I think the whole point was that it was very quiet, like deafening quiet to the point where you're trying to figure out what happened and it's building the suspense. And he's just like,
your ears are ringing after you shoot a bullet.
Like,
this person watched that, they paused
something was wrong.
and they're like, gotta tell the internet.
they're like,
I'm sure
you would have heard that body fall for sure.
Yeah. Whatever.
But yeah, I just thought that gave me a quick kick. But it's the time to give our reviews. I will go first since I think everyone knows that I'm going to give this thing a good review because I've talked about this from our very first podcast as one of my favorite A24 films. So not to muddy the waters or anything like that, I will go ahead and I'm going to give this a plus 24 because I just absolutely love this movie. It is what I basically brought me into the fold of A24. It made me realize that Robert Pattinson's a good actor. I don't know. I just thoroughly enjoy this movie. Even on the second watch, or not the second watch, I don't know how many times I'm at this point, but even after all these times, I keep finding small little trinkets of information about, you know, leading to the conclusion and kind of giving you those breadcrumbs along the way. I love this movie. But I will pass it off to whoever wants to go next. Whoever's the most...
Kelly?
Okay. So this is coming off the cuff, but this is kind of my grading scale, and it might change sometimes, but 4 quadrants of cinematography, sound design, writing, acting, and then kind of where I think that the movie falls on all of these things. The Rover itself, for me personal, and then my personal taste comes into play as well. This is not anything that I would ever probably have watched just based on the plot that's kind of Western, the place that it takes, like an Australian movie, like it's not really my kind of cup of tea usually, and it's very masculine as well, very manly kind of story, so not something that I would usually see myself going towards. That said, exceeded all my expectations with that being the basis for it, and like I had kind of alluded to before, it felt like a video game. I felt like I was in it, I was immersed, I loved that it is such a fresh take on post-collapse, and it's so fresh after the collapse, like we've touched on as well. Acting phenomenal, cinematography phenomenal, writing beyond phenomenal. Phenomenal. I thought that, it's something that I will rewatch because there are so many quotable moments of it and so many pieces that you can just like take that with me. Okay, so all of this said, I could go on, but I was really surprised by it, and I'm giving it an A24.
Yes. Okay, we're done with the podcast. Damn. I appreciate it. Everyone have a good night. This is the best rated movie we will ever have.
Cole feels vindicated.
Yes.
All right.
All right. Go. I'll give Eric. You go ahead, or you could follow up.
So I really loved this film. I loved how it was a fresh take, like everyone was saying, on a post-apocalyptic world. I think the only thing for me that I detract from it, though, is that, I don't know, maybe I'm not the biggest Western fan. I like some Westerns, but I do like kind of dystopian films that kind of comment on, the world that they're in. And maybe this film didn't really need that. It was an entertaining story, great acting, great writing, and maybe this film didn't need that, but it did leave me wanting a little bit more at the end, I think. So, taking all that into account, I think I'm going to give this a B plus 24. It was still a very good film, just as I'm grading it on the A24 scale, knowing how much, every other A24 film, what it means to me and what I like about it, I think I bring this down to a B plus 24.
Well, everyone has opinions, I suppose. Blaze, go ahead.
I think Eric puts a really good spin on what he just said. There's many great things that I like about this film. Again, I like the condensed universe that they live in. I love the way Guy Pearce just completely knocked his role out of the park. I love that Robert Pattinson broke out into being a real actor. I love the long takes, the edits where we complained about it in Under the Skin. I feel like the long takes here were actually very apropos in the scene that they were trying to set. And then the other thing, we talk about A24 films, right? And this A24 film really, again, with Enemy, where it's subversive and, interpretations. The other good thing about A24 films that I absolutely love is the slow burn, and I really feel like this movie did a phenomenal job at making your heart skip a beat at least once every 5 minutes. My biggest complaint about this film is very strange because I really love Robert Pattinson in this film. I think this film would have benefited without Robert Pattinson. I think it would have just been Guy Pearce on his own, taking the Lone Ranger point of view. No, because here's the thing. I think there is a film superior to this film that kind of touches on the same themes that came out before it, and it has two lead characters. It's called The Road. It's based on a book by Cormac McCarthy, and it is phenomenal and does everything that this film, but just a little bit better. So I feel like if it would have split off a little bit on its own, the way that all the great things that I said about it, plus whatever the other thing was, I think it would have gotten closer to what Cole and Kelly said. But I'm gonna have to sit with Eric. I'm gonna give it a B24. Just on my first time watching it, maybe I'll like it again. I'm gonna give it a B24, solid B, yeah. But it's not The Witch. It's not Midsummer. And it's not Hereditary. So
it's not trying to be. It's trying to be something different and better. Up next.
I do.
All right.
Okay, Eric, did you have something to throw in there? Or?
I was just saying, if I'm going to grade this on a scale of Westerns, though, this is probably one of my favorite Westerns I've ever seen. So fair enough. I will give it that.
Yeah. All right, Kevin, don't disappoint me.
So, I know, fair enough. So Cole had mentioned this tagline earlier, and I'm going to start my review with it because I think it's very relevant to what we talk about, is fear the man who has nothing to lose. I think that really sets up the viewer in general for how this entire film plays out. Rover makes a nihilistic statement about how quickly society can discard its moral compass when food and shelter become scarce, and I think the rejection of all of those moral principles really sets the entire backdrop for this entire movie. one of those movies where it's set in a world where life is bleak and destroyed. And I think that also sets up a really cool post-apocalyptic viewpoint for that viewer. We talked about the modern-day Western ad nauseum, but I really think that is relevant because Westerns in general, right, they stress the harshness of the environment, the isolation of the wilderness in general, and I think that it did a good job of making you feel those aspects of the outback. I thought that Pattinson and Pearce were excellent in their roles. They did a really good job of showing the emotion because those were the entire characters moving the vehicle of the movie forward. I thought that the soundtrack, the cinematography, and the viewpoint in general was all done very well. But what I did have a complaint about was kind of the pacing of the movie in the middle parts. I felt the intensity of the beginning when it set up the plot driver from the accident into the moving, but it died off very quickly when you got Guy and Robert together and they were just kind of chatting as they were traveling. Then it ramped up in intensity at the end. So if I did have a complaint, it would be that it kind of had that lull, but maybe that was also intentional in there to kind of keep us moving. In the end, it felt like an A24 movie, which is probably a good thing in general when we're talking about those formulaic sets of leaving a big question at the end, but also having that art house vibe about the entire film. It was not successful across the board for major audiences because it definitely did not appeal to a major mainstream audience. It had that niche vibe, that indie vibe, and that's the reason that it didn't make as much money. Doesn't mean it's a bad film, but it does not mean that it appeals to a mass audience. In the end, I think that it fits down the middle for me, and I give it a B plus 24.
Wow. Well, I appreciate everyone's opinions. Kelly's the most for sure. I appreciate everyone listening and enjoyed the podcast. This is truly an amazing film, and if you have not seen it, I don't know why you're listening because we just ruined the whole thing, and that is part of this, why it's so special.
I'll renege. I'll give it a B plus 24. I feel like I don't want to be like the Debbie Downer. I'll give it a B plus 24.
B plus and above club.
All right,
Good
so this
job,
is
Rover.
officially our highest rated film of the podcast. So congrats to me, congrats to
On a
Robert
medium,
Pattinson. Everyone have a good night.
Good job
I
with
love
all
you
your contributions on this film, Cole.
Yes. Eventually, we will make up that $12 million deficit, or what is it? No, $9 million deficit that.
Yeah.
One day.
Whatever it is.
One day.
We'll get there.
It'll be our highest rated until we rewatch Spring Breakers, and you guys will have a little head. You'll be more mature. You know.